Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omer. Now, the U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan, Khalilzad, has met with senior top leadership in Pakistan, including the foreign minister. And there have been very positive vibes coming out of the Foreign Office. Both have assured each other that they will fully cooperate. Shah Mahmood Qureshi has gone ahead and said that we will try our best to persuade the Taliban to come to the negotiating table. To discuss the more complicated nuances of this debate, we have with us international relations expert, Ms. Uma Bakai. Thank you for joining us here. Ms. Bakai, could you shed some light on what Pakistan's role really is in trying to bring Taliban to the table, to the peace negotiating table?
Well, you can't deny the fact that Pakistan, because of its geographical proximity and also its past relationship with the Taliban, does have a role to play in any peace process that takes off the ground in Afghanistan. But perhaps what is under discussion right now is the blow hot, blow cold in our relationship with the United States. So a lot of people are seeing a lot more into this letter that was written to Imran Khan about Pakistan playing a role. I think that is something that the American establishment has always agreed to and has conceded that attainment of peace is next to impossible unless Pakistan is brought on board. But I really don't think anything new has happened, because Pakistan is once again asked to do exactly that. Exercise its influence over Taliban, conceding to the fact, or sort of re-endorsement of the fact that Pakistan does have an influence over the Taliban. We do not have the full text of the letter made public, but I am told that the letter also says that Pakistan should discourage Taliban from scientific evidence in Pakistan. So I think all that has changed is the tone and tenor of President Trump. The United States is asking us to do exactly the same thing which it has been asking us to do for last several years under several presidencies.
But it is rather confusing because in light of what happened 2 weeks earlier with President Trump's Twitter spat with Prime Minister Imran Khan, after that Fox News interview that aired where he categorically said that Pakistan has done nothing despite the billions we've given in aid. He slashed the coalition support fund. That continues to go completely ignored in this issue. And now he's written a letter, maybe to smooth out differences in context to how the US Special Envoy to Afghanistan was making an appearance here, making a tour, meeting all the stakeholders.
You see, that is another context, because there is a major paradigm shift in the United States thinking, which is now being acted on the ground. And that paradigm shift is that 6 months ago, the United States had completely refused to directly talk to the Afghan Taliban. It said that this negotiations will only happen between the Afghan government and the Afghan Taliban. But the Taliban completely rejected it. And we saw that in the last 6 months there was this change, and the Americans spoke directly to the Taliban, for which the Taliban also issued a press release. This was a response to the deteriorating security situation on the ground in Afghanistan. So this was an exercise in compulsion, and what you see is an extension of that. So there are two different contexts to the same situation. The relationship between the Taliban and the United States of America is perhaps undergoing a paradigm shift. The envoy is an extension of that, where because of his insights and knowledge of Afghanistan's situation has been employed again by the US administration to facilitate the peace process. But my trust is that what they are asking Pakistan to do is not any different from what they had been asking Pakistan to do in the past. Consecutive presidents of the United States, consecutive governments of the United States have asked Pakistan to do this, and our response has been cautious.
Now, let me interrupt you here. So basically, you're saying there's really different with what America is asking Pakistan to do. But at the same time, it's a catch-22 situation for Pakistan maybe, because the DGI-SPR has gone to say again that we do not have that kind of influence over Taliban. It's an overstated argument. It's beyond, it's just rhetoric. Now, when they say that, yes, we will support fully this peace process, we will try our best to get Taliban to negotiate with all the stakeholders, are they in a way also endorsing this public view, this view of the US that we do have somewhat an influence over the Taliban?
Victory narrative. Our narrative and the narrative from the United States does not match. We have contradictory opposing narratives. but we need to work together. So in my opinion, the only change that has happened is that the tone of United States America's president has mellowed down. What they are asking us to do is exactly the same what they've been asking us to do for the last 5 to 7 years.
Thank you so much, Ms. Huma Bukai. Now we have with us Mr. Najib Sharifi joining us from Kabul. He's a political analyst. What is your take on this meeting that has taken place with the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Mr. Khalilzad, meeting with top leadership in Pakistan, and this conversation going ahead that Pakistan will do its best to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table with all stakeholders? How do you see this progress?
Well, if we see this event against a backdrop of strained relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan in the past couple of years, it's a big movement. However, how much will this meeting manage to overcome the fundamental differences and challenges that exist between the two countries? That's a question that need to be, we can't answer at this stage. We need to see what the outcome of, the meeting, the tangible outcome of the meeting is going to be. The issue is that in the past 17 years, there have been a lot of meetings between different stakeholders and counterparts about peace in Afghanistan. However, none of them have failed to produce meaningful, substantive and tangible results.
But here what we're seeing is a bit of a catch-22 situation where Pakistan continues to say that now in this day and age we do not have that kind of influence over the Taliban. The ball game has completely changed. What we can do as a neighboring country is to provide any kind of assistance that we can to bring all members on the peace table. Now, do you feel like this overshadows the underlying issue? Maybe there is another reason why President Trump has reached out to Pakistan to solve this problem?
From what we have seen in the past couple of years, or in the past decades, I believe Pakistan commands the biggest influence over the Taliban compared to any other country in the region. Yes, Pakistan does not have, the sole influence or the kind of influence that could push the Taliban to do anything they can, because, the war in Afghanistan obviously has become complicated, and there are so many other, kind of factors and competing interests that are involved in this war at this stage. However, I believe, the U.S. has reached out to Pakistan, despite the, strained relations, because of the comparatively big influence that Pakistan commands over the Taliban. But again, how much this influence can result in peace or convince the Taliban to, join peace process, I think that number one, it's a matter of, whether Pakistan will genuinely make, the needed efforts to work.
So here I want to welcome our third guest. He's a journalist also hailing from Kabul, Mr. Faiz Farah. Thank you so much for joining us right now. You've heard your peer's conversation, his take on what Pakistan's role is and how much influence they have over the Taliban in joining the peace process. How do you see this, where Pakistan stands?
Of course, there's no doubt on the position where the Pakistan stands in the regional, in the Asian countries, among, especially if we think about Afghanistan, about the peace process in Afghanistan. No one can ignore that the Pakistan plays a strategic role, how they play in the country. Of course, Pakistan, if we see the key of peace in Afghanistan, in my opinion, is within Pakistan. Since the Pakistan is not honestly working on the peace process in Afghanistan, reconciliation in Afghanistan, neither United States, neither any other country can help the peace reconciliation in Afghanistan. I believe that as we have a strong relationship with with Pakistan as a neighbor country, bilateral agreement and relationship which we have with Pakistan. And since 17 years of war in Afghanistan, continuously we have seen the Pakistan was involved in supporting the militants, and especially for the other those who are terrorist group was from Pakistan. They were attacking to Afghanistan. They were coming to Afghanistan. They did whatever they wanted in Afghanistan. But in my opinion, Pakistan play a vital role in peace and reconciliation process in Afghanistan. Since Pakistan is now, if hopefully with this new regime and new government of Imran Khan, if they play and do their honesty with Afghanistan brothers to bring the peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan, and try to push the Taliban to come on the top table to resolve this issue of peace in Afghanistan.
So the biggest concern, Mr. Najib, right now is that the Taliban agreed to speak to all stakeholders in the region, all neighboring powers, and this includes Russia. Now, how do you see Russia's role changing? And considering just in 2016, they have come out and disclosed that they have very close contacts with the Taliban. In fact, they have been assisting them with information and other means to fight the more threatening factions, militant factions in Afghanistan. How do you see their role as compared to what Pakistan can provide as assistance?
Well, their role is, if I talk from the perspective of an Afghan, their role is extremely bold at this stage and at the same time very destructive, because if Russia is really interested and genuine about peace in Afghanistan, they should deal with the state in Afghanistan rather than this insurgent or terrorist group and the very idea of fighting one terrorist group with another terrorist group is wrong. Because if you're really genuine and committed about fighting terrorism, you can work with a legitimate state that we have in Afghanistan. But again, I come back to my previous point. At this stage, considering the complicated and complex nature and standing of the war in Afghanistan, I believe until and unless we have an equation or a settlement which accommodates the interests of all regional countries as well as NATO and the US in Afghanistan, I don't believe we will be able to have reached a durable settlement in Afghanistan, because all regional countries have their stake and interest in Afghanistan, and a formula that will manage to secure the interests of all of them seems extremely difficult to me.
Okay, we're just joined by Brigadier Retired Mr. Malik. I want to welcome you to Newswire. Let me quickly bring you up to speed with what our other guests have been talking about. We've got a political analyst and journalist from Kabul. We've also spoken to international relations expert. Now, the general opinion is from Afghanistan that Pakistan has historically been in a position of influence over the Taliban. Now, we know that DGISPR Pakistan has come out and again said, in light of this meeting that has taken place with the US Special Envoy to Afghanistan with the top leadership in Pakistan, that we really don't have that kind of influence anymore. We do not, we cannot affect the peace talks or persuade the Taliban until they're ready to come out and speak themselves. How do you see this?
First of all, thank you very much for getting me on the program. I think I would generally agree with the assessment of the DGISPR. A few years ago, when Pakistan had some influence over the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, one could have expected Pakistan to do something as per the desires of the Americans. But now if we see the entire strategic environment has changed. And there are a number of other players who have come into Afghanistan. Now if you see the Afghan Taliban, they are being engaged by the Qataris in Doha, by the UAE, some of them are in the Emirates. China and Russia have also got involved in the peace process, and they are engaging the Afghan Taliban, as well as the Iranians. So now that the Afghan Taliban have got so many more options available to them, obviously the influence that Pakistan who was then the only power dealing with them initially, let's say about 15 years ago, or maybe 10, 12 years ago, then Pakistan had some strong influence on them. But right now, that influence has been withered away, and it is becoming more difficult for Pakistan now to impose its will on the Taliban and to get it to do something. So generally, I would agree with what the DG ISPR has said.
Okay, now Mr. Faiz, let me come to you from what the Brigadier has just said in terms of our influence and how it has receded over the years. Let me ask you this, how you see the Taliban's new stature in the international arena with so many neighboring countries allying themselves with different factions within the Taliban.
Yeah, as far as my opinions are concerned, whatever the respected guests has said, their views nowadays, I'm also agree on that point that the Taliban was as much as influence that Pakistan had onto the Taliban. I mean, since 2 years before. I mean, since 1 year before. Right now, the Taliban Pakistan has not that much of influence, but still, as we see in the historical backbone of the Taliban regime, where they have came from, I mean, they have got a lot of support from the Pakistan regime. I mean, before the regime of the Pakistan, and they were a lot of influencing by the Pakistan government itself in Afghanistan. They continues the war in Afghanistan. But nowadays, of course, the Taliban is not only one group. They are influencing by the Iran. They are influencing by the Russia. They are influencing by the Pakistan, by China. But as far as one thing is concerned in the region, the new foreign policy of the Pakistan is concerned, as right now I've engaged with Russia, as I engaged with the China and Iran and China as well. This relationship can help us, even help the Pakistan to gather all these countries' opinion. I know that interests of all the countries are within Afghanistan. China is seeking their interest in Afghanistan. Russia is seeking their interest in Afghanistan. Pakistan is seeking Iran, each and everyone. But as my point of opinion, as one Afghan, as a neighbor country to all these regional countries like Pakistan, that we all are brothers, we are a neighbor countries. Peace in Afghanistan will bring the peace and prosperity in Pakistan. Peace and prosperity will be in Afghanistan. If there is a peace and prosperity in Afghanistan, there will be in Russia, in China.
Mr. Najib, what Mr. Faiz is saying, but this is something that is endorsed across the board, even in Pakistan. Various Pakistani leadership have come out and said that it is imperative that we see peace in Afghanistan for the well-being of Pakistan itself. And of course, it continues to be a big trade partner with Pakistan, Afghanistan, that is. So how do you see this? How much of this is rhetoric and how much of this is a conflicting narrative coming from across the border? And I say conflicting narrative because we've seen military operations done here in Pakistan and North Waziristan trying to flush out foreign fighters, and as a result there have been cross-border fights, arguments between both parties.
I believe much of it is just rhetoric, because if we really believed in the idea of peace and prosperity in Afghanistan, influencing peace and prosperity in Pakistan, I think much of the problems would have already been resolved. The issue is that I believe the Taliban are still seen by kind of like a lot at this stage, many countries in the region, as an instrument to secure their foreign policy interests, and I believe this idea still prevails within the Pakistani military establishment. Will these, again, if we come back to the original point, that the meetings translate into peace, I have my serious doubts, despite the fact, that we have had significant progress in the past couple of months in terms of, many parties coming forward to work for peace. But I believe that core and fundamental mentality and policy has not changed yet. So until and unless that changes, I don't believe we'll have peace here.
Brigadier Malik, I would like to ask you here that what our guest has also said now, that until unless parties involved, the stakeholders involved, they get their priorities right, how do you feel that Pakistan might have any interest in terms of their foreign policy in Afghanistan? Do you agree with what he's saying?
Yeah, by and large, I think he's on the right lines. But you must remember one thing, that whenever we talk in terms of statecraft, national interests are permanent. They do not change. We may change allies, we may change enemies or foes, but our national interests remain the same. So, in the same sense, Pakistan's national interests in Afghanistan will not change. They will remain the same. And we will have to keep on making adjustments according to the circumstances that prevail at a given time. Mm-hmm. At this moment, if you see, Afghanistan is the hub of not only regional influences and regional concerns, but of global concerns as well. We have all the major powers of the world involved there. We have the United States, which is involved in the biggest way, then Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, then we even have peripheral India, and then we have the Central Asian republics who also have an interest. So there are a plethora of cross currents and cross and clashing national interests that are at the moment going around or clashing in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Therefore, Afghanistan finds itself at the hub of all these interests and the clashes. So it is obvious that in all this conundrum, Pakistan needs to ensure that its national interests are secure. And as long as Pakistan's national interests and Afghanistan's national interests converge, we will have peace on our borders and we will have a peace within the region. Mm-hmm. However, if Afghanistan's national interests diverge from Pakistan and they converge with some other parts, for example, like with India, then obviously we have a problem. Then this divergence of interest between Afghanistan and Pakistan will create issues, and we will have to sit down together and through dialogue find a way out which is in the interest of both the countries. So I generally agree with the speaker that Pakistan's interests have not changed. I don't think that they will ever change as far as Afghanistan is concerned. However, adjustments will have to be made as per the circumstances that prevail at a given point in time.
So, Mr. Faiz, do you agree with the Brigadier that foreign policy hasn't really changed over the years? And do you feel that maybe does it affect in any way how how the solution will be found in the region? Does it impede progress on peace talks?
If this is the mentality of the Pakistan government, especially the strategies, those who are taking this step into the peace process or international affairs to make a relationship with a country like in Afghanistan, this is the fact which has been said several times by Parvez Musharraf and others government. Pakistani leaders before that they were always thinking about the interest of the Pakistan. We believe that each and every country, each and every citizen of the country, where they belong to, wherever it is, they have to think about the interest of their country.
But are you suggesting that other neighboring stakeholders like Russia, India, Uzbekistan, they don't have the same priority when it comes to their foreign policy and alliances with Afghanistan?
See, they have their foreign policies, they have their interests, they have their thing. But since the Pakistan is not honestly working on the peace process of Afghanistan, since the Pakistan is just thinking about their own self-interest and let whatever happen in Afghanistan, I believe that one day whatever is happening in Afghanistan, that will bring to the Pakistan, and Pakistan will suffer a lot because of this insecurity and insurgency, whatever is happening in Afghanistan. This is my opinion and our expectation as a brother, as a neighbor country from the Pakistan government, especially from the strategies, that they have to do some...
Okay, since we're running out of time, I want to quickly move on to Mr. Najib here. What Mr. Faiz is saying, if you've heard it, how do you feel Pakistan has any influence what is happening within Afghanistan itself? Now, there is a big dichotomy between what the Afghan Taliban are saying, the other the different factions within Taliban, the emergence of ISIL in the region, and also the Afghan government. How do you feel like Pakistan has any influence on what is imploding within the country itself?
Well, if the Pakistani leadership operates within the Pakistani territory, if their fighters are being treated within Pakistan, if their leaders can travel with Pakistani passports, and if they're being advised and guided in terms of military strategies and tactics, I believe this just by default creates this
That
kind
still
of like
doesn't explain.
big
That still doesn't
influence
explain how the number of
that-
casualties have gone up. Now, the attacks coming from Taliban have gone up. U.S. airstrikes have gone up. Just in the past 9 months, from airstrikes, 300 deaths have been seen, 25% of which were civilians. How has that got anything to do with treatment being given to fighters in Pakistan?
Well, my main point is about the level of influence and whether the Pakistan or Pakistani military establishment has influence or not. So it was mainly about that. So this is the main reason, or these are the main reasons, that explains and establishes the kind of leverage and influence that the Pakistani military establishment has over the Taliban. However, we cannot ignore and negate the other side of the equation, which is, that Iran is at this stage supporting Taliban, Russia is supporting the Taliban, and we have, and they're coming out very, very, confidently about this. So, has this led to the strengthening of the Taliban? Yes, because now they control even more territory.
Okay.
The level of casualties of Afghan forces has dramatically risen.
Right.
And we have, as you said, much higher civilian casualties here in Afghanistan.
Right. Now, let me quickly... Okay, we're just running out of time, so very quickly, sir.
The war has become very complicated in Afghanistan. And until and unless we find a regional international consensus over peace in Afghanistan, I don't think we'll be able to achieve a peace.
Okay,
so,
Brigadier Malik, let me ask you now, since we have just 30 seconds left, very quickly, in the backdrop of historical suspicions coming from the history between the two countries and in the region, how do you feel we are progressing towards establishing peace, getting Taliban to negotiate with all stakeholders?
I think peace in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region is a two-way bilateral street. And it cannot be done one way. It takes two to tango, if we recall. You see, what Pakistan is suffering from Afghanistan is that there are hostile intelligence agencies like RAW, like NDS itself, like Mossad, like CIA, which are functioning from Afghan territories, and they are operating against Pakistan within Pakistan. If we see the last two incidents that took place in Karachi and the one in Orakzai agency, both those incidents emanated from Afghanistan. Now, how can the Afghans on one hand support our enemies and they contribute to our to kill our people, to our losses, and then expect peace?
All right. With that, we're going to come to a close to this story because we don't have any more time for this segment. Thank you so much, all our guests, Mr. Najib, Mr. Faiz, and Brigadier Malik. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newswire. We're going to take a quick short break now. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. Now, Houthi rebel negotiators have arrived in Sweden for UN-sponsored peace talks. Now, they were successfully escorted by the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths from Yemeni capital Sana'a. Now, peace talks are expected to start in the next few days. To discuss more, joining us on a line is Mr. Hussein Al-Bukhaiti from Yemen, and also Mr. Hassan Zaidi, international relations expert from Lahore. I'll start off with you, Mr. Hussein. How do you feel these peace talks are going to go ahead? What is your view on how successful they will be?
Hopefully the talk will start tomorrow. But let me make clear that the discussion in Sweden tomorrow will be only about humanitarian aid. They will talk about three main subjects, which is how to mechanism to reopen Sana'a airport, and as well how to smoothly let food and aid coming through Hodeidah port, and to how to can they pay Yemeni public sector salaries. Because there are over 1.5 million Yemeni who hasn't got paid their salary after Saudi Arabia has moved the bank from Sana'a into Aden. And the last subject, it will be about how they will implement an agreement that was finally signed by Saudi Arabia yesterday for a total exchange of prisoners. The new UN envoy to Yemen, Mr. Griffin, is actually focusing at this time on humanitarian issue because, as he said, we have to take care of Yemeni civilians first. We have to build steps to build the trust between all parties, and maybe the big issues about weapons, about militia and withdrawing from some cities, and how to form a government, it will be in a coming talk after Sweden.
Mr. Hassan Zaidi, here I want to bring you in and get your opinion on how these peace process is going to progress in the coming days, considering the prisoner swap that has already taken place. How do you feel about things unfolding in Yemen?
First of all, let me make it clear, I'm from Islamabad, and this is a very good development. If you read 8-hour editorials in the news, you will find everybody in Muslim world is very happy about it, because after 4 years of war non-stop and human casualties, especially children and unarmed civilians, it is a welcome move. And on international level, it is believed that MBS, the Saudi Crown Prince, he is now convinced that this war, which was basically his own project at the first place, is not going to achieve for Saudi Arabia what they wanted. And at the same time, Trump administration, it is badly wanting to control fuel prices, and this conflict, it is going on and on with no end in sight. And it is not good for keeping a balance of fuel prices in the world. And this is one of the reasons for Saudi Arabia to move to talks. Otherwise, it has been defying the United Nations for almost 4 years. The United Nations has made a number of calls for the Saudi Arabia to come to table, to talk with Houthis and to find a way out of this conflict.
Yes, and as this conflict, yes, it's been 4 years, and one of the most tragic and escalating humanitarian crises here in the region, in the world, in recent history is taking place here in Yemen. Now, Mr. Hussain, how do you feel about the Houthis? What are they bringing to the peace table? Do they have a strategy in mind?
The main now strategy for the Houthi is, as I said, to focus on the humanitarian issue. But the strategy that has actually been signed by all parties is what all parties in Yemen before the war has agreed in the international dialogue. There are many outcomes of that dialogue, and any agreement in the future should be based on these outcomes, which is the formation of a coalition government to hand over the weapons from all parties and groups and militia in Yemen, including the Houthis, and to set a plan to unite the Yemeni army. All these are in the outcomes of the national dialogue, and I'm sure that any future agreement will be definitely based on this. If the Saudi or the so-called Hadi government will try, or any other party, even the Houthi, to go out of this dialogue, I think the war will continue, and because those dialogues were signed by everyone in Yemen, and no one has opposed any of these outcomes.
The office of the United Nations Humanitarian Office has basically gone ahead and said that 2019 Yemen is going to be the biggest humanitarian issue. What steps are being taken by the international community in addressing the famine that we see there, the malnutrition that we see there? There are UN reports that are coming out saying that as many as 30 children die daily in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm 35 years old, and I have never heard of so-called famine in Yemen, neither heard any case about cholera or severe malnutrition. It only happened after the Saudi intervention in Yemen in 26th of March 2015. Yemen has many crises before, and we fought each other before, but because there was no international intervention, and no blockade in Yemen, Yemeni got well with their lives. And as you mentioned, there are 17 million Yemeni depend on humanitarian aid. Yemeni population is about 26 million, and you can just imagine 85 of the humanitarian aid coming to Yemen is coming through Hudaydah port, and now Hudaydah port is under the attack of the Saudi-led coalition. And about some people like say it's kind of proxy war. This blockade in Yemen actually has proven that Iran does not exist into Yemen, because the Saudis have a so tight blockade backed by the United States, by the UK and France, and Yemeni find it hard to get food and medicine into Yemen. So I don't think that it will be so easy for the Houthi or for any other group to get under this blockade, to get weapons from outside. That's why this so-called Iran involvement and proxy war is just a tactic used by the Saudi, because they always as well play the card of the fight in Yemen is Shi'i against Sunni, and it's not like that, but the Saudi want using those kind of statements to bring countries like Pakistan and other to the fight in Yemen. But it was really good that Pakistan actually has refused to be involved directly in the war, even though when the Saudi
And if I were to ask you very quickly, considering you saw this entire region turn into a massive conflict zone in the past few years, I want to ask you this, that how did this change? It started as a counter-revolutionary mobilization back in 2011 against a Tripocratic uprising. And from there to now, we have seen this with our own eyes, this turn into a region of proxy wars being fought between Iran and Saudi Arabia. How did we get to this point?
After Ali Abdullah Saleh was taken down, as you mentioned, in 2011. After that, there was the so-called the National Dialogue. Hadi was chosen as president for 2 years term, and it was extended to 1 year. And then when he resigned, I believe at the beginning of 2000.
No, my point of asking you the question was not the historical timeline of it, but to sort of highlight how this turned from being a democratic uprising, a counter-revolutionary measure, and this turning into then a sectarian conflict, and then later on branching out to something that was completely different from where it started from. Now, I'm talking about the allegations of the Iranians, the Houthis, and then the Saudi Arabia trying to secure ports as a means of their ports for the means of their transport of their goods. Can you highlight a little bit of that issue?
Yeah, I mean, things start to get wrong when Saudi directly involved in the conflict in Yemen by supporting some groups inside Yemen and inside Sana'a, and all total war situation has broke out loose after the Saudi started their war. And if you can see now the map of Yemen, and you can tell where the Saudi actually are focusing their most power troops is in the west coast of Yemen, and in the Bab al-Mandab Strait is one of the most strategic shipping line in the world, and as well all the islands in Yemen now is fully under the control of Saudi-led coalition. And I believe that all that is the UK and a US plan to control the coast of Yemen, and that's why the situation now in Yemen is getting so really bad. And as I mentioned, we haven't had this before, is because there are many countries like the United States and UK and France, they want to have a foot in Yemen, and they are doing that by using Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates as a tool to actually to destroy Yemen and to control the coast of Yemen.
Now, this is where I was going to ask you the same question, which you've sort of answered here, is how the foreign interference has played a role in trying to sort out the war in Yemen. And even now, as peace talks, I understand, take priority over a few crucial issues like the reopening of Sana'a airport. But what role is the UK and US playing in trying to bring everybody to the peace table?
Actually, the UK and US role is mainly on supporting the Saudis, is mainly, as Trump has said many times, is making money. And the stand of Saudi Arabia, as the United States and UK in the war in Yemen is exactly the same with their stand after the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. as United States and UK were clear that they will not actually stop any weapons supplies, and they have made billions of dollars. During the war in Yemen, United States has struck one of the largest deals in US history with the Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and as well the UK during the war in Yemen. Their weapons sale to Saudi Arabia and Emirates has increased by 500%. So all this war is actually about making profit for those two countries. And if those countries actually wanted to stop this war on Yemen, they can just have pressure on the Saudi, or they can at least stop the weapons supplies, stop the logistic supplies to the Saudi, and I think they can stop the war in a matter of days. But they want this war to continue, because if this war will stop, this means that the Saudi might not need this logistic supply, these weapons from the United States. And what Trump have said, that we need those contracts, we need to continue selling these weapons, and Yemen is becoming as a market for these weapons sold to Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates.
Okay, Mr. Zaidi, let me come to you here. Talking about the weapon sales that continue to Saudi Arabia and coalition partners in this war in Yemen, especially in light of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, there was a lot of international pressure on Saudi Arabia to do more in trying to stop the war in Yemen now. But if US sales don't stop, if there is no embargo on or no sanctions on Saudis on sales of arms, how does this help the situation at all?
Yeah, ma'am. Basically, I teach at International Islamic University, where Saudis and Yemenis, all these people, they come here and they run the affairs. Before we talk about U.S. arms sales, let me make it clear that Saudis, they do not want this war to continue. They are trying to find a way out of this war. But as far as the sale of weapons and the industry that Mr. Hussain has pointed out, the international war industry, basically what I have understood, it is that industry that wants this war to go on, and Trump has clearly refused to stop sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. He has clearly refused to acknowledge that Yemen conflict basically is a conflict between Yemenis and Saudi coalition. And in addition to that, before some days, Yemeni embassy in Islamabad, it has issued a press release that this is a conflict basically between the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels, and Saudi Arabia is
right. Mr. Zaidi, thank you. Let me move on to another guest here in the studio joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Khuldoon Shahid, for joining us at Newswire. We're talking about how this strategy is going to unfold, especially with Houthis in mind, the peace talks that are about to start in Sweden. Do you feel like they have a strategy in mind?
I personally don't think they have a strategy in mind, because I think they're approaching the negotiations in the wrong sequence. They're looking for a political solution when the first thing they should be looking for is a humanitarian solution. And the next step would be to look for the solution to the war. They want to address the political solutions straight away, which will take a lot of time. First, they need to address the problem of the famine that's affecting, over 60% of the local population. So I think they've got the sequence all wrong. Plus, I personally believe they do not have all the stakeholders on board. They have of course, the representatives of the Houthi rebels, and of course, the de facto Yemeni government. But there are so many other federations, so many other governorates who are also stakeholders. So I don't think they're including them.
Mr. Hussain, do you agree with Mr. Khuldoon's opinion here that not enough stakeholders are joining this peace process?
I think I partially do agree with him, because if Saudi Arabia is not going to go in a direct talk with the Houthis, I don't think we will see an end to this war. I have realized, and we have seen actually in all UN Security Council statement and resolution, and as well UN envoy statement about Yemen, they have not mentioned the Saudi as a part of this war. It looks like the Saudi does not exist in this war. So to have a solution, they must come to the table as well. We should have this talk, like in Sweden, between Yemenis, and then we should have this talk between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. And they can talk to each other, they can find the solution. If there is any hatred against each other, what the Saudi want from the Houthi, like to feel safe that the Houthi exist in their southern border. If they're not gonna do that, I don't think that any solution will be. We will reach any solution because as long as the Saudi has not signed any agreement, this means they are not responsible for keeping this agreement, and they can actually have pressure on Hadi government in Saudi Arabia and other parties they supported to make any agreement fail.
Now, the only person who, the stakeholders that has given acknowledgement of these peace talks is Iran. Basically, they've said we acknowledge the UN's efforts to bring peace to the region, but UAE and Saudi Arabia have been ominously missing. How crucial would it be for the success of these peace talks to bring them to the table? Is it still too late, or is this, like Mr. Hussain earlier said, the entire aim of these peace talks is to solve the humanitarian crisis?
I think, again, like I initially mentioned, it's important to take the domestic stakeholders on board as well. But of course, there's any solution that does not involve the Saudis and the UAE will not be obviously long-lasting. So even for the humanitarian solution, you need Saudi Arabia on board, you need the UAE on board, and I think the way to go about that is to pressurize the US, because even though President Trump has completely sided with the Saudis in the conflict, but the US Senate is now pressurizing him into reconsidering that.
And that's my next question. How do we get anywhere with this peace process when arms sales to Saudi Arabia, to coalition partners, really never cease, despite all Western pressure coming down on MBS, that what you've done about Khashoggi, we need to see more. There's been a lot of sanctions been imposed by EU countries, but US, the main provider, really doesn't seem to be bothered much.
That is the thing, and I think there should be the most important aspect of any agreement is to have a categorical, ban on any airstrikes, considering the havoc that they are causing in Yemen. If there is any, regardless of the reason or the context that the Saudis.
And what of the blockage of humanitarian aid that is not being allowed by Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely, absolutely. These are if you don't agree on these points, you can't go anywhere with the negotiations.
But Saudi Arabia's claims are also very real in terms of cross-border missile attacks from the Houthis. Now, how do we make sure both parties come to peace, completely cease all kinds of attacks on each other's borders?
I think that's very important, because that is the single biggest excuse that they use, that there is cross-border attacks. So for the Saudi side, for the de facto Yemeni government side, there has to be complete stoppage over airstrikes, and for the Houthi rebels that they need to completely cease the cross-border attacks.
Now, a lot of analysts are saying these talks are in a way confidence-building measures. How much of this do you agree with, and what more needs to be done in order to give confidence to the parties, the stakeholders, that we have to move forward from here, keeping in mind everybody's interests?
I think considering how long it has actually taken to get the parties on board shows how important these talks are. I mean, when you talk about having other stakeholders on board, yes, that's important. But the fact that these talks are happening, and ironically, almost to the day former President Saleh was killed. I mean, there is obviously a lot of symbolism, a lot of practical significance to these talks as well. So yes, the fact this is happening is important. But what next? There has to be something tangible that you gain from these.
Mr. Hussain, very quickly, I want to pull you in this conversation in terms of how much of these are confidence-building measures, and how do we go forward, making sure every stakeholder's interests are guarded?
I think first thing to build confidence is to build confidence for Yemeni civilians. They have first to sort out the humanitarian aid into Yemen, how to open all airports and ports in Yemen, especially the one in Sana'a, and how to pay the salaries for Yemeni civilians, because the civilians in Yemen are the most devastated. And just like United Nations said, the cholera outbreak in Yemen is one of the largest since record began. And I believe this was one of the first good steps that the UN envoy in Yemen has taken, is to build a confidence first between the Yemeni civilians, because what's happening in Yemen, people who are suffering in areas under the control of Saudi Arabia are blaming the Houthis. People who are under the Houthi control, they blaming. So we have to get all Yemenis all together by allowing food and medicine coming to Yemen. And then when we see the humanitarian situation will be actually better, then Yemeni people will have hope in the talk, and they will have full support for the parties taken in those talks.
I think so, Mr. Khuldoon, there's another point of view that maybe calling ceasefire in the region is not the hardest part. The hardest part would be to see whether the port of Haider, the power that the Houthis have over it, whether they're willing to hand it over to the UN or not.
Absolutely, and of course, the fact that the other side wanted, the UAE wanted to completely take over the port itself. So it needs, both these sides. You need to ask the Houthi rebels to obviously hand over the port, but you also need to make sure that there is no aggression from the Saudi UAE coalition, because they have been eyeing that port, which is the only source of humanitarian aid and arms in the area. Right. So you need to make sure that both sides are kept away from the region.
Right. So, Mr. Hussain, let me ask you this also. How long do you think will they, besides, like I said, it's easiest to, as some analysts say, to hold ceasefire in the region, but what happens to the port of Haider? How do you see that transfer of power happening and when it's happening?
I don't think that Houthi will hand over the port or the city. Because this is the only port in the hand of Houthis and the only port that are under their control. And as the United Nations have said, 80 to 85% of humanitarian aid coming into all Yemen is coming through this port. And you can just imagine that the Saudi-led coalition is in control of more than 10 airport and port. Why the United Nations is actually only using this port? This is because some people might not agree with the Houthis. The Houthis were securing really well all the area they control. On the other hand, we see in one of the main ports in Aden, south of Yemen, that there are fighting almost every day. Al-Qaeda is running free there. ISIS have some control of some cities in the south. And I believe if this port is handed to the Saudi, who will guarantee, or to the United Nations, who will guarantee that this port and this city will not become as in south of Yemen? And let me just remind the people watching this that we have seen three major cases of the United Nations taking control of cities. In Srebrenica in 1994, when the United Nations has taken control
Mr. Hussain,
of Srebrenica.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here since really running out of time. Very quickly, closing remarks from you, Mr. Khuldoon. You heard Mr. Hussain's take on it, on what he was saying about confidence measures and whether to trust Saudis on holding strong to their promise as well.
I think the agreement that needs to be finalized is something that shouldn't depend on whether or not, it should be very, how trustworthy each party is, because I think we've seen that you can't really trust either of the two groups. The UN needs to ensure that it's categorical, the terms are not ambiguous, and it needs to ensure that it takes over takes charge of the conflict and not leave it to either of the two parties.
Very interesting indeed. UN, whether it will deliver and take charge of the situation as the peace talks are expected in Sweden from tomorrow onwards. I just want to thank you, Mr. Hussain, for joining us from Yemen, and Mr. Shahid for joining us here in Lahore studios. You've been watching Newswire. I'm Ayza. Bye.